Hey everybody, it is Coach Malcolm again, and this is going to be my second video in what may become a series that I do, I'm not sure yet, on pretty wild tactical games that were played a couple centuries ago. So they're older games. Some of the games that I'm going to be including, not this one exactly today, but some of the games are going to have some sort of rule changes that were around at the time that are kind of interesting to look at. The last video I posted had something called free castling that was pretty interesting to look at, so check that out. If you're interested, this video is going to look like a pretty normal game, but I think it's still cool to think about it in the context and just to see how chess has evolved. So this game was played even longer ago. If you look right here, this game was played in 1497. So that's just a very, very long time ago. I was very surprised that they had a game this old, and it's actually a very complete game. So a lot of the games that are older aren't always complete. So it'll sort of end in a not exactly draws position, but in a position that it's unclear who would win the game if it was played out. But luckily, I found this one, and it wasn't the case. And so for this video, like my last one again, we're obviously, as a chess player, despite whatever color pieces you're playing for, you're thinking about your opponent's ideas as well, their threats, their weaknesses, their blunders, their ideas, so that you can make the best moves possible. But we are going to be playing on the side of the black pieces again in this video. All right, so let's get started. White played e3. So here's a little bit of 1497. So I was wrong. I believe in 1497, you were not allowed to, no, that's incorrect. You were allowed to move the pawn 2 squares to start off the game, but white simply just chose to play e3 here. But as we know today, in more modern times, e4 is the much more valued move. So black continued with e5. So obviously we see 2 squares was permitted. Pawn to d4. Pawn takes d4 and queen takes d4. So my first question is a pretty basic one, and it is just, do we thinking about our opponent's ideas, does this queen takes d4 move look like a smart idea, just knowing how opening positions work? So take a second or two. If you need more time at any point during the video when I stop to take pauses to ask questions, of course, feel free to pause. All right, so I would say usually no, right? We usually don't want to bring our queen out early in the game. If you ask the chess coach from Searching for Bobby Fischer, he will agree with me as well. So if I were white, I would have maybe thought about taking with the pawn instead, developing my pieces, because we'll see after a move like d5, black is planning ideas like knight c6, maybe even c5, but maybe less likely than a move like knight c6. It almost looks like a reverse Scandinavian in which black has their queen on d5, but here white just moves back to d1. So now the game is going to look pretty normal, so I'm going to go through it not too fast, but relatively quickly, because there are a lot of just normal developing moves, despite the 1497 characteristic of the game. So bishop d6. This queen obviously cannot take on d5 because bishop b4 is a discovered check. That will win the queen, not anything on d4. So white develops normally, knight c3 attacking the pawn. Now we play knight f6, defending that d5 pawn. Knight f3, bishop e6, maybe adding another defender. Bishop d3, knight c6, b3, right? Both white and black are playing pretty normal moves, developing moves, getting their pieces on pretty good squares. h6, I think the point of this move was to stop this knight from going to g5 and attacking the bishop on e6, because black wants this bishop particularly for a kingside attack, which we will see shortly, so don't worry if that's a little confusing. Right now, bishop b2, queen d7, it looks like black is angling to castle queenside. Queen e2, castles queenside, castles kingside. So we have an opposite side castling game. And what often happens in an opposite side castling game is that you attack on the opposite side, and often with the pawn. So how can black employ that idea here? Take a second or two, figure out how to start the kingside attack. All right, hopefully we see pawn to g5, right? Black has no fear. They're going to go after this knight. They're likely going to bring in their h-pawn as well. They've got their bishop pointed at the king side. Both of their bishops pointed at the king side. The queen is backing up this bishop. The knight is over here. This knight can come in if he wants to. So a lot of ideas. So the knight moves back to e1, I guess prematurely avoiding this pawn to g4 idea. Black continues with the pawn storm, pawn to h5. And here, white plays f3. So f3, I'm not particularly a fan of this move because when there's a pawn storm heading for a king side, I don't like to give out hooks. And hooks mean sort of ideas and ways for black in particular in this position to trade off their pawns to open files against the king, open up squares around the king. So f3 offers a hook, and black is going to try and take advantage of that with a move like g4, probably trying to take on f3, bringing a rook in onto the g file, opening up this attack. And it just allows more attacking ideas for black. And also this knight on f1 is starting to e1 is starting to cramp up white's position a whole lot, I would say. But here, white decides to play f4 because they really don't want this rook g8 pointing at g1 idea to happen. So f4, and there is a threat of pawn to f5 here, threatening to trap this bishop on e6. But black ignores this threat and continues with pawn to h4. So white, takes the bait almost, but not really bait in this case. We'll see why. Pawn to f5, trapping this bishop, supported by the bishop and the rook, and we have our bishop on e6. Sorry, that was not played. Our bishop on e6 and queen on d7, and this bishop is trapped in by pawns and that queen on d7. So black decides to do a pretty bold sacrifice here, which is, oh no, not yet, sorry. Pawn to h3, pawn takes e6, here it is. Bishop takes h2, which is a pretty bold sacrifice, and it turns out it almost, white falls for it, and white plays some blunder moves that we are going to take advantage of as black, but it doesn't particularly work, and we're going to see why. So bishop takes h2, it's a check, so this pawn on e6 obviously cannot take the queen on d7. So when black decides to capture back king takes h2, how do you think, white decides to capture back king takes h2, how does black proceed here to open up files, attack that now exposed king on h2? All right, so hopefully we see pawn to hg2. It's a discovered check. This rook now has an open file, and this looks very, very good for black, but there's a way that white can defend that they miss in this game. So king takes g2. Now this queen obviously has to deal with the direct threat of being attacked, so she decides to make the threat queen d6, pointing at h2, which is checkmate in one. So here, white has the opportunity. If you've noticed, black sacrificed their bishop on e6 and their bishop on h2. So they're down two pieces, and they only have one pawn in exchange. So they're down a lot of material. So if white can defend themselves in this position, of course, I would be scared as white too. It's a very open position. There's a lot of pieces pointing, especially this pawn as well. We can't forget about that. Pointing into this white king side that has no pawns defending it at all. But if white plays this move, rook f4 here, this would have been much better. It blocks out the queen. It attacks this pawn, which is obviously guarded by the knight, but it very much hinders this rook as well because it's not supported by the queen. Instead, white decided to play rook h1, which was a worse idea. So here, how do we continue with our attack as black? How do we get rid of this defender as a rook, but keep attacking on the open h file? So see if you can think about that for 1 second. All right, hopefully we see rook takes h1 is a pretty interesting idea. Black is almost just has to take back on h1, and then we bring our rook to h8. So we did do a rook trade, but now white's rook is on a1, not doing much, and we've taken out that rook as a defender. So this is a pretty good idea. White's only sensible move, if white goes king to g2, where is our checkmate in? Oh, pop my ears. Where is our checkmate in, I believe, a couple moves here. Let's just look. How can we force white into checkmate here? Sorry for the word stumble. All right, so we would likely play queen to h2. This king's only square to go to is f1. Queen h1, the king can only go to f2. Rook h2, the king's only move is king g3. Queen g1, further pushing this king back. His only square is king to f4. It looks like, well, of course, let's just acknowledge we can take this queen for free. We're not going to go too much down this variation because we are running away from what's most important. But knight h5 continues to chase down this king. We could also likely take on e2 and then target e3 as a square. But let's go back quickly because this isn't what happened. White went king to g1, and now here we still need to involve our pieces. So piece involvement, like I said in the previous video, we are going to need more attackers in this position. This rook is not enough, and this queen is doing a good job of guarding that h2 square for against the black queen, which is why white didn't choose to go to g2. So here, how is white going? Black going to involve their queen on d6? Take a second. Right, they're going to play queen g3, coming up close and personal in this position, taking advantage of the g file, also attacking f2 at the same time. Here, white defends knight g2, giving this rook a little bit more ideas for the future if he decides to come in and play a more key role as a defender. And now, yet again, we need some more piece involvement, some more attackers brought into the position. Our rook is doing a good job taking advantage of the h file. Our queen is obviously very close to the action, but we need some more piece involvement here. So how can we do that? All right, so hopefully we found knight to e5, bringing this knight in with the obvious threat, first of all, of knight f3 check. It's important to note we do have access to this h2 square now because the knight cut off the queen's side to it. So here, white plays queen f2, trying to trade off the queens. A queen trade here would not be a good idea for black. We don't want to trade, particularly when we're down material and lose our number one attacking piece. Here we would be down 2 pieces and lose the game. So black, decides queen h2, attacking the king. His only square is king f1, and surprisingly enough, white is still holding it down here, even though it may appear differently, because after g3, right, applying more pressure on the queen, here white made a mistake. White plays queen takes f6, but really if white plays just queen to g1, now this queen is she is trapped on the h file for the time being. This white rook is doing a good job. It's able to come in. We'll just notice that white's pieces are able to defend the position. So here we'll go down a short variation. If black takes back on e6, white wouldn't capture on h2 because then they fall into a lot of trouble with a pawn promoting. But what white is going to do is, target this knight on e5, target a7 as a threat, and it's very hard for black to make a lot of progress here and win the game. So white is better. But white made the big mistake of playing queen takes f6, and now this is right. Here we go. Drastic blunder. This is a problem for white, and they will lose the game now. So tell me if you can find our checkmate combination here. All right, so queen to h1. The white king's only move is to go king e2. Queen takes g2, forcing moves. Obviously, if the queen goes to f2, she will be taken. King d1. Well, I believe the game in the database that I accessed ended here. So I'm assuming white resigned the game. But if we just want to take a little bit of a further look, king d1, rook h1 is, a deadly threat. If bishop f1, rook takes, their only move is queen takes. And here we have a winning game for black because they are going to just promote their pawn with ease and win the game. And, white will likely end up sacrificing, and then it will just be a queen versus bishop advantage, which we will be able to win. So that's the end of this game. Sorry for some of the divergences in there. We'll try and stay focused on the main line, but I hope we learned about tactical play, and particularly that just from White's perspective, like I said, we think about our opponent's perspective too. Under pressure, under sacrifices in particular, it is easy to get scared, but you must sort of keep your wits about you, if you want to use that expression, but you must sort of stay calm, think about the best moves to protect yourself in the position, because White had a chance to save it here in 1497, but they failed to see it. All right, that is it for this game, guys. Thank you so much. I will see you soon.